Muslim scholars in the Arab world call on members of the Syrian military to mutiny and join the armed uprising. Is President Bashar al-Assad becoming more isolated, or is Syria becoming a battleground for rival sectarian and global interests? Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Phil Rees. Well, Syrian troops have been pummeling the city of Homs for a 13th straight day. Over 20 people were reported killed, including 4 in the southern city of Daraa, where the uprising began 11 months ago. The UN has given up counting the dead, which some believe is over 6,000. In Qatar last weekend, the International Union of Muslim Scholars, headed by the influential Sheikh Dr. Youssef al-Qaradawi, organised a rally in support of pro-democracy protesters in Syria. Where does a Muslim now stand in terms of support for the uprising? In part 2, Abu Qatada, accused by the government of being a threat to national security, has been released from Long Lartin top security jail. The British media whipped up a frenzy, not because he'd been jailed without trial and has never been convicted of any wrongdoing, no. They're mad because a European court is preventing him facing the possibility of torture in his home country of Jordan. More on that in 25 minutes. But first, another week of bloodshed in Syria and a flurry of political statements from all quarters. President Assad called a constitutional referendum that he says would end nearly 50 years of single-party rule. It was backed by Russia, but the West considered it, quote, a laughable ploy. Youssef Qaradawi issued further religious advice advising Muslims to boycott products from Russia and China, the 2 members of the UN Security Council that vetoed a resolution calling for President Assad to step aside. In addition, al-Qaeda's leader, Dr. Ayman Zawahiri, joined the fray, giving the movement's full backing to the insurgency. It places al-Qaeda on the same side as the Muslim Brotherhood and the West. What does that mean? And of course, it's unlikely that the West is only interested in the democratic wishes of the Syrian people. Syria is part of an alliance that includes Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas, all of which reject the right of the United States and Israel to enjoy military hegemony over the Middle East. It's also a fact that unrest in Syria could have widespread religious and regional implications. Some fear that Syria could become a Levantine Yugoslavia. There are sectarian divisions. The Alawites, the faith of the ruling Assad family, make up around 10 or 15% of the population. Another 10% are Christian. And the rebels represent, for the most part anyway, the large Sunni majority. Well, before we discuss these matters, here's Nina Aref with a summary of the week's events.
Not from Obama, not from the UN, and not from the Arab League, but victory comes from God only. That's the message of these tens of thousands of Syrians in the city of Homs, where verses from the Quran are recited to confirm that message. But world bodies are still itching to intervene in the year-old uprising, which has witnessed almost 7,000 deaths, as Syrian opposition groups fight to overthrow the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The Arab League's resolution calling for a joint Arab-UN peacekeeping mission has been rejected by the embattled president, whose image as a brutal dictator is emphasized more and more as the death toll rises. Meanwhile, new efforts have been made to end the bloodshed, this time by the International Union of Muslim Scholars, headed by Sheikh Youssef al-Qaradawi. The group organised a rally in Qatar this weekend in support of protesters in Syria, also launching fundraising efforts for the Syrian opposition. This weekend, al-Qaeda's chief called on Muslims from other countries to support rebels in Syria, saying they cannot depend on the West for help. Ayman al-Zawahiri, in a videotaped statement, asked Muslims in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey to join the uprising. This as reports emerged that al-Qaeda-linked fighters from northern Iraq have been steadily flowing into Syria. The Syrian government says at least 2,000 members of its security forces have been killed, combating so-called armed gangs and terrorists. Last week, a UN Security Council resolution on Syria, which would have endorsed a previous Arab League peace initiative, was vetoed by Russia and China. Meanwhile, fresh violence in the city of Homs was reported, perhaps ringing home the message of Syrian rebels, who earlier declared that any victory will be from God and no one else.
Aref with that report. Well, I'm very pleased to have in the studio Dr. Khalid Fikri, an Imam and Islamic researcher. Thank you for being with us. We also have Ali Al-Ahmed, the editor of Suryun.net. and a former member of the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood. And on the phone from Minnesota in the United States, we have Dr. Fawzi Slisley from St. Cloud State University, an authority on Islamic-inspired political movements. Again, thank you all for being with us today. If I could talk to you, Dr. Khalid Fikri, were you surprised by what Dr. Qaradawi said, and how important and how significant is that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Really, I am not surprised of what is going on. The fatwa of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi is accepted all over the Islamic world, and we were waiting for something like this. Really, the people of Syria, they need all the support which can be given to them from all people, all the Muslims all over the world, and the shuyukh or the ulama, the scholars, have a big role now. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi really said the truth, and he is always backing and supporting this uprising in all the Arabic world. And really, my hope now is that the Muslimin will follow his fatwa, and there will be a big rally all over the Islamic world supporting our brothers and trying to stop this bloodshedding, which, as mentioned, 11 months. This is enough and enough.
Well, I mean, Dr. Fikri, you mentioned there, of course, Muslims everywhere. I mean, I don't think you'll find such support amongst Shia in Iran, for example.
Yes, you are right. Of course, when I mean the Muslims, I am talking about the majority, which are Ahl Sunnah, the Sunnah. You mentioned in the introduction that the Alawi, and this is also a very important issue, that is, there is a religion background in this conflict. You know, the Alawi, they believe that the God is Ali ibn Abi Talib, as a human being. And this is completely a deviation, and it is astray. It is not through the Islamic belief.
Do you consider them Muslims?
Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, he said they are disbelievers, and those who think that there is another God, or there is differences, or another prophet rather than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or as the Nusayriyin, Alawiyyin say, Allah is Ali ibn Abi Talib and his wife Fatima and his children. This is not Muslims at all. And this is the fatwa of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and many of the scholars. And this is one of the reasons why they are very hard and harsh regarding the Muslimin in Syria. They are killing, they are torturing, they are doing whatever incredible things. And I think the deviation, because of their deviated sect, is giving them more courage to kill and to torture and to do this massacre in Syria.
Okay, well, let's hold that idea of the question of the sectarian divisions for a moment and come back, Ali Al-Ahmed, to, in a sense, what is happening in Syria now, and you know, the way that the Arab world is fairly unified behind them. What do you think that the kind of next stage will be? Because, as I said in the introduction, Syria is becoming a battleground internationally as well, with Russia and China not appearing to be able to give way. So, I mean, what do you see happening?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about my country, my home country, Syria. In fact, we are facing a project. It's not only Syria, that country we are facing. We see in Egypt and in Tunisia, the regime maybe 15 days, 25 days, and even in Libya was a special cause. But in Syria, we have a project which is the Safawi and Shiri project. This project comes in the history about every 500 years or 600 years come again. When our nation is weak and divided like now, these people join themselves and then come. When you ask him about if they are Muslim or not, if they are Muslim, they will not do anything like that.
But they still make up probably 10 or 15% of the population of your country.
But,
so
I mean, if they have 1% of Islam, they will not commit these crimes. If they have 100%, if you see what's happening now, killing the little children. Last week in Homs, about 15 child in the hospital. They cut the electricity supply on them, and all died in the hospital. So we are going to see, on my opinion, we are going to see the Sunni people on all over all over the world, and the Arab will be joining this battle, and in the end will be Shiite and Sunni.
So let's go back to what Sheikh Qaradawi basically now justified that the legitimacy in terms of fiqh, in terms of jurisprudence for an armed uprising is in place now in Syria.
Yes.
You would agree with that, would you?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Yes.
If I could bring you in, Dr. Susi, from the United States. You've heard this discussion so far. How much do you think that what Dr. Qaradawi said will bring Sunni Muslims together and legitimize what, after all, is an armed uprising? And of course, in other parts of the world, sort of armed uprising against established governments are called terrorism.
I think it's important. How far it goes is another question. But it's important because the entire Muslim Ummah is invested in what's going on in Syria. And just to comment briefly on something that's been said, I think because this is an issue that concerns the entire Ummah, so not just Qaradawi has a responsibility to speak about it, but equally the Shias of Iran, I think, have a responsibility to speak from an Islamic perspective. They should support the weak party to this conflict, and they should stand with the weak party of this conflict, which is the Syrian people. We should separate the political from the theological differences, and the military equation from the theological rulings. We are not fighting the Shias or the Alawis because they are Alawis, but because they are oppressing our people in Syria. If it was Sunnis oppressing an Alawi minority or a Shia minority, the legal obligation would be on Muslims and Muslim scholars to support the weak party. In this eventuality, it would be the Alawis and the Shias. So I think Dr. Al-Qaradawi is right to speak on this issue, but some might, there is some issues there that come up in the sense that we haven't seen him criticizing the Arab League's shameless attitude in this whole saga. We haven't seen him, the call of Dr. Al-Qaradawi was strictly to the Syrian soldiers. He does not ask the Muslim community around Syria to take its responsibility. Jordanians, Iraqis, Turks, they have an obligation to assist the Syrians too. And I think this is because Dr. Al-Qaradawi is still limited within the national framework, the nationalist framework of the Arab League. He cannot make the Arab rulers angry at him, so he calls on the Syrians strictly. He cannot be seen to call for like a pan-Islamic insurgency.
Well, Dr. Sisi, if I could interrupt you there, of course, I mean, the other thing that happened this week, of course, is that Ayman Zawahiri did call for support there. I mean, perhaps he's trying to ensure there's a distance between himself and Al-Qaeda. And as an authority on Al-Qaeda, I mean, how do you read that in terms of the other events going on?
Well, it's interesting that Dr. Zawahiri's intervention seems to be closer to Islamic Sharia, because Islamic Sharia says people that are oppressed have an obligation to defend themselves. If they are weak or incapable, as the Syrians are now, then the obligation to help them goes to those around them. And in the case of Syria, we're talking about Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, and Lebanon. And that's what Dr. Al-Qaradawi called on. Some people say, Zawahiri called for Al-Qaeda to intervene in Syria. I don't think that's what he did. But he called the Quranic injunction in Sharia that people around the Syrians have an obligation to assist them with their selves, with their wealth, with their words, and their opinions. This is an Islamic injunction. What Dr. Al-Qaradawi was doing is also Islamic injunction, but it's tainted by the politics of the Arab League and the Arab rulers. That's my reading.
Okay, Dr. Sazita, we'll come back to you. Please stay with us there. I mean, Dr. Fikri, I mean, how worried, I mean, obviously we heard those discussions there. How worried are you, though, that there is a growing regional sectarian divide that itself will have a kind of global divide on top of it? In other words, Russia and China on one side, on the sort of Shia side, if we're going to talk in slight kind of approximations, and then you've got the kind of West with having peculiarly kind of embraced the Muslim Brotherhood?
Really, this is something I think that the deviation will happen sooner or later. I mean, people on the truth against people on the false, or the right and the wrong, the truth and the false. And also this will happen in the Islamic world. People of the straight path will be distinguished, will be far away from the other sects. And this is growing up. The Sunni, which I believe that this is the right path, will face all the other deviated sects. As my brother said, they will unite against the truth of the Ahl Sunnah. And this will be very clear. The Iraqi people, since they are ruled by the Shia sect, they will never support Syria. As well as Hezbollah. He is supporting the regime. He is supporting the dictatorship. He is supporting the killing and the bloodshedding. Why? Because of the religious background. The same thing will happen with these deviated sects all over the Islamic world. Also politically, there is the benefit of the Russian with the Syrian, as well as how they stand themselves against the American and the Western. This also will come to an end. That is, I mean that Russia will be isolated sooner or later from the Islamic world, even if it is not now, but later on. And as we hear that the Arabs kicked out the Syrian embassy, there will be now a call for kicking out the Russian ambassador.
But do you think that the United States is an ally of the Ikhwan Muslimin? I mean, no, hardly been so recently.
I can't say they are allies to the Ikhwan Muslimin, but there are some benefits which come across between them. And sometimes we say there is, as a poem, when there is an enemy who is a friend, the friend or the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we can accept it in this way. Both of them. Both of us having one enemy, for example, and I don't want to say that Iran, the regime of Syria, Hezbollah became now one group, and the Sunni people as well as the Western say that this is one group of the enemies. So it may come as crossing of the benefits and uniting of the enemies and uniting of other peoples, which we may not say they are allies.
This happened before, didn't it, in the 1980s? Ali Al-Ahmad, I mean, let's look at this question of Syria. And one of the problems is that actually, Syria itself is a kind of colonial construct in a sense, isn't it? I mean, Greater Syria extends to Lebanon and indeed to Israel. I mean, there's a great danger of what's happening in Syria spilling over to Lebanon. It's a completely false border, isn't it?
Yes.
Definitely will be. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
we have seen last week 2-3 clashes between Tripoli, people Sunni in Tripoli, and minority Alawite in Tripoli, in Lebanon. So this disease will spread over the area. Even in Saudi Arabia, we have a little bit in the eastern part, in Kuwait, in Bahrain. You know what's happening in Bahrain. Just remember.
Are you worried that this serves Western interests? By
just one point. Just remember the huge publicity gained by Hassan Nasrallah 3 or 4 years ago after the Israeli attack on 2006. He gained all over the Arab world. Now he has nothing. He is now like evil, like evil now. Hassan Nasrallah. For example, Michel Aoun. He was calling for democracy, for human rights, for everything. Now he's putting himself just
Christian leader you're talking about.
So we have a very like.
But are you concerned though that you're playing into the hands of Western interests?
No.
Well, that by accepting the United States and a role for the United States and Qatar and Turkey, who are allies of the United States.
I think now. The world is now counting or is estimating who is right and who is wrong. Now I think that the barriers between Al-Qaeda and this radical organization will be destroyed a little bit. So they will a part of the Sunni majority. We are going to see another scene in the future. So the West will not consider this radical organization that the enemy. The enemy now is Iran and Hezbollah and
Are you worried
Syria.
that the Palestinians will be left on one side because they have had a lot of support, obviously, from Iran through Syria, down through Hezbollah, and indeed the Hamas?
My point of view that at the end, the Palestinian will be the party who will gain the most thing, because when the Ummah is united, Israel will be
Indeed.
too much. Israel is living on our division. Israel is surviving on our conflict. So in the end, maybe within 10, 20 years, the most party gaining the interest is Palestine.
Dr. Sisri, I mean, let me just turn to you in one question before we'll come on to perhaps the geopolitical aspects, which I know you have a lot to say. But do you believe that sort of Al-Qaeda here, I mean, obviously it grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the 1960s, or at least its roots, of course. But do you think that, in a way, the political voice for the Muslim Brotherhood will kind of weaken Al-Qaeda and almost kind of bring the movements together in a, of course, ending al-Zawahiri's kind of distant enemy threat?
I think what I see on the reality, it's the Muslim Brotherhood that seems that it doesn't have its ducks in a row. What the Arab revolts have done is parachute the Muslim Brotherhood in the seat of the moderates. They are now in the seat of the moderates. And we see them, for example, in Egypt, they're saying we will accept Camp David, we won't accept Camp David. In Tunisia, a few days ago, we heard the news reports that the Muslim Brotherhood government arrested 3 terrorists who were planning to start an Islamic Emirate, and they had 5 Kalashnikovs. And it was amazing to hear them say that 3 people with 5 Kalashnikovs planned to start an Islamic Emirate. In Syria, fascinating, we see one side of the Muslim Brotherhood with the revolution and one side of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas in this case, on the side of Iran. So it is the Muslim Brotherhood that seem to be overwhelmed with the opportunities that the Arab revolts have brought their way. And because they are flip-flopping, sometimes they act on the side of the revolutions, sometimes they seem to act purely on the basis of considerations of what would get them to power fast. And if the Muslim Brotherhood keep following these kind of policies, I can assure you that they will be out of sync with the streets.
Dr. Sissi, I've got to end you because we've got about 30 seconds left. I just want to ask you one quick question. Is there a danger of the United States sitting back and thinking, wow, we like this sectarian divide, this is in our interests, and we will co-opt the Muslim Brotherhood and our interests will be secure in the region?
I think they do, and I think the challenge is not to make this a sectarian conflict. This is a question of justice and freedom, and it should be seen from that perspective. And if it goes into a sectarian conflict, it's not guaranteed that the United States will be the winner, but it sure means that the United States will try to exploit it, and there will be other parties who will try to exploit it too.
Fawzi Sissi, thank you very much. Thank you to all our guests. This conversation could go on a lot more. Hope to speak to you again soon, but I'm afraid we're coming to a short break. Coming up in the second half, the government says he's a threat to Britain's national security, but why should we believe them when he's not brought before an open court? The controversy surrounding the release of Abu Qatada. That's in a few minutes. Stay with us.